Kirk, why are you special?
And the first thing I would say about being special is I'm not. I think that like everyone else in life, you never know how your parents raised you, the talents and gifts that they gave you, how you want to lead your life and kind of assume responsibility for it and the path you're going to choose and take. I look back and I would say that the hand of Providence has guided me throughout my life. I've been very blessed in many ways, despite the tragedy of what happened on USS Cole. But I am no special than anyone else. It's what you do in those defining moments that really determine not just the path of your life now and into the future, but more importantly, how are your decisions going to help and affect others?
I'm Herb Thompson, a Green Beret and resolutionist.
And I'm Corey Thompson, Herb's less hairy half and branding expert.
Our guests come from various backgrounds, but one thing is true. They are special.
I had a feeling you would kind of answer that way, and I'm not surprised. And I think that's why you are special. And I think our audience will see that. Naval Academy grad, obviously commander of the USS Cole that was attacked 25 years ago. We'll get into, I think it ties around to 9/11 too, where you were on the morning of 9/11. I just find it so ironic. And then the author of Front Burner, which is just an incredible book. I guess my first question is, I don't really understand the Navy. So what is it like to command a warship? Because this seems, I don't know, just something really special to me, commanding a warship in the U.S. Navy.
It is an incredible privilege and responsibility. I mean, you stand on the deck of that ship in front of your crew in their dress uniforms, friends and family, hopefully with you. If you get the opportunity to do it in port, you'll get to say the three greatest words of your career. I relieve you. And in that singular moment, you carried out a centuries-old time-honored tradition where you assumed total accountability for that $1+ billion national asset and the lives of almost 300 sailors. And your job now is to take that huge responsibility and mold and shape them into your crew to be absolutely ready to go in harm's way to safeguard our U.S. national security interests around the world.
It just intrigues me because when you're out there on the high seas, like you're in charge, like whatever happens there, but really you're representing the United States wherever you are sailing around the world, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing you want to get across to your sailors is that, they and they alone now as young men and women are personally responsible for every decision they make and where they're going to go with their lives. And in doing that, you also need to make sure that they understand that their actions have consequences because it reflects not only on our ship, in our case, USS Cole, but on the United States Navy. And when we go overseas, you're ambassadors. What you do and how you behave and the actions you take are going to reflect on the United States of America. And you want to make them you have to grow them into it because you want them to realize the gravity and the seriousness. But by the same token, it's a port visit. Get out there and have fun. Let your hair down a little bit. We've been at sea working real hard. But by the same token, keep yourself in check and don't do anything that would embarrass our country.
Yeah, that's a fine line, and I've had to navigate it. But I've always thought that too when I was doing stuff working with indigenous forces on land. But when we come to a village, we might be the first American they've ever. So it is like we're not just a Green Beret or Special Force team. It was we are America at that standpoint. I always took that responsibility very seriously.
A lot of times when we do port visits, one of the things that I always ask for, and most commanding officers do, is what can we do with the local community? In other words, get a group of volunteer sailors and go into a local orphanage or go into a school. Take that, clean it up, do some painting, straighten things up, repair things that need to be repaired because you've got all the talent and the equipment on the ship. Help them do that. And it's extending that goodwill that really says, this is what we're really about as Americans. It's not just showing the flag and projecting power. It's also about showing who we are as Americans in that we are very blessed in our country. here's an opportunity to give back to others that are less fortunate.
You felt that on mission trips, right?
Absolutely. Having the ability to go and what we learned from that was oftentimes the first thing that you had on there, asking what they need instead of projecting what we as Americans feel that they need. That's the real way to help.
Absolutely.
Intrigues me to go back 25 years before 9/11, September, October 2000. The world was a lot different than it is today. But you were sailing the USS Cole. What was life like on the ship?
One of the things I had done is I had set very high standards for my crew from the moment I walked aboard and took command. Every time my crew came close to reaching the level of performance that I wanted, I raised the bar a little bit. And part of the reason I did that is because I knew I'd been given a gift. And I needed to make sure that every single one of those crew members, every single one of those sailors understood that they were part of that team, that we were going to be a crew together and that we were going to achieve things that had never been done before. And that really was punctuated the day we got underway from deployment, because when we pulled away from the pier, Navy ships always hold a ceremony called manning the rail. Get into your dress uniforms, you're at parade rest, you're all the way around the ship, friends and family down on the pier, tearfully waving goodbye to their loved ones for the next 6+ months. But as USS Cole got underway that morning in August, we achieved something that had never been done before in the Navy and has never been repeated since. As our ship got underway, every single one of my officers manned the rail. We got that ship underway with a 100% qualified enlisted crew. And while you think they would have been happy, pleased, and proud about that achievement, a lot of them kind of looked at it as well. The old man's got a nice check in the block to get promoted, but in the meantime, I've missed my kids' soccer games, ballet recitals. I didn't get the honey-do list done at home. On duty days, I'm not only working all day, then I'm standing a watch. Now, rather than going and watching a movie, I'm having to trace systems around the ship. But what that would give the crew is 2 months later, after we deployed and we were attacked on October 12th, they had the confidence, despite the announcing system failing, where no one can tell them what had happened, where to go, and what to do. They would show up at general quarters, and when people were missing, they were able to take over, not from only just a technical standpoint, but more importantly, a leadership standpoint, to do what was necessary to save our ship and save our shipmates. So in all that lead up, I now have a crew that is at their peak for operational capability and talent. They are doing, everything was humming great. Things were going the way they were supposed to. But even then, in between port visits we made in the Mediterranean, I mean, we did suffer through Barcelona, Spain, Villafranche, France, Valletta, Malta, Koper, Slovenia. Our mission is to go to the North Arabian Gulf. But in between each of those port visits, what did we do? We drilled. Because the last thing you want to do is say, I've got this mastered. We're at our peak. I don't need to practice anymore. And I kept saying, no, all this has been about being good ambassadors for the United States. Now we're going into the Middle East, higher threat area. We'd better be ready.
How has that impacted your personal life? Is that something you take home as well?
I'd have to admit that post-attack, one of the things that I've had to deal with is I've looked at it and I am probably more unforgiving of myself now than I've ever been when I make mistakes, because I will always live with the fact that I was the one accountable officer. 17 sailors died on my watch and 37 were wounded. But at the end of the day, I just look at it and say, you need to still maintain that high standard in your personal life and what I do in my work for other people, because I know that I've got a lot of people looking at me even today that say, how did you handle and deal with that tragedy, not just in the moment, but in the years that followed? I mean, I could have taken everything that happened on Cole, put it into a box like a lot of people do, folded it shut, taped it up, put it on a shelf and said, I don't want to ever deal and talk with it. But I also knew that what had happened to me was a defining moment for our Navy and the nation. I didn't know at the time that it was going to set us on the path toward 9/11, but I also knew that how I did things going into the future, I wanted it to serve as an example for all those young junior officers and others coming up through the ranks, so that should something happen to them in the future, I was hopefully setting a standard of performance that they could measure up to.
Powerful. Going back to October 12th, 2000, sailing into Aden in Yemen. Brief stop for fuel, just to get fuel, correct?
That's correct.
You're docked, handling procedures to get fuel, and then at 11:18 local time, the attack happens. You were in your stateroom?
I was up in my cabin.
What were your initial thoughts?
When the explosion went off, you instantly knew it was bad. It was a thunderous explosion. 8,400 tons of guided missile destroyer was suddenly and violently shoved up and to the right. And as you could feel the ship lifting up and then sliding back down in the water, rocking from side to side, surging fore and aft on the mooring lines, power failed, lights went out, ceiling tiles popped out. I came up in the brace position, grabbing the underside of my desk as everything popped up and slammed back down. And in that singular moment, the first thing I did was not look outward, but actually just take that split second to look inward to myself and say, okay, whatever has happened, it's bad. But as commanding officer, the number one thing you're going to have to do from this moment forward is no matter what you get told, you must stay absolutely calm and focused and make decisions. And then it was start moving out and figuring out what happened. And in that singular moment, like everyone else, we thought it had been a major fuel explosion. Very quickly, though, because the ship was moored starboard side or right side to appear in the middle of the harbor, if it had been a fuel explosion being next to a stationary object, I would have been pushed out into the harbor. I'd been thrust up into the right. The only thing on the left side of the ship is open harbor water, so instinctively I knew something has come along the side and exploded. That's when I went back into my cabin, opened the safe where I kept the keys to all the weapon systems on the ship, the missiles, the guns, the 20-millimeter close-in weapons. I brought a personal weapon with me on deployment. 6-hour 229 9mm, loaded it, chambered around, decocked it, grabbed 2 clips of ammunition, went out and said, well, this might be your destiny, but you're going to go find out, A, what happened, and B, if there's going to be a follow-on attack, your job is to make sure that no matter what you do, make them duck first and don't leave an empty round in the chamber.
Just reading the book and hearing your story, I just found it so impressive. In that moment, you knew this wasn't an accident and it was an attack, and you responded accordingly almost instantaneously, and then went to leading the crew.
Well, you go through life and you really, you view the world through this little tiny lens. When something like that happens, just through adrenaline and what's happening, that lens is wide open. And in that moment, you have to adapt and be able to have the capacity to take in huge amounts of information. Every sense is alive. And that's why when that first rolling of dust from down the passageway washed over me, silently washed over me, you could smell the dust, you could smell the fuel, but there was also an acrid metallic tang that settled in the back of my mouth and I didn't know what it was. And that would be part of the plastic explosives that had gone off.
You then had to lead the crew to save the ship. I mean, obviously figure out what's going on, likely casualties, and you had to save the ship. How did you go about doing that?
I'll be honest with you. For probably the first 5 to 7 minutes, nobody knew whether the captain was alive or dead. My executive officer at the back of the ship said, we don't know whether the captain's alive or not. So he took over as commanding officer. And he began directing the damage control teams, getting people to their stations, telling them what to do, where to react to, what was going on. As I mentioned, the announcing system had failed. They fell back on their training, showed up at general quarters, stepped up into positions they needed to. And initially, I went out, determined that it had been in an attack by a suicide bomber that now is in little pieces all over the top side of the ship. Talked to my chief gunner's mate, who was providing and reestablishing the defensive perimeter around the ship. Went to the bridge, talked to the Yemeni Port Authority, and asked them to freeze all harbor movements since we didn't know where the attack had come from. Notify local hospitals, they said there were 2, and send boats out to us. So I am in the process of absorbing information, making decisions, and it wasn't until I came down, saw the damaged area up close, and then walked into the central control station that I saw my executive officer. And you want to talk about a true professional? Chris Peterschmidt is my XO. In that instant, the captain's here. He stepped back into that role as the executive officer without missing a beat. Turned it over to me. He and the engineer, Debbie Courtney, briefed me on the status of the ship. We'd lost 2 of 4 of our engineering spaces. We knew that in that moment, though, we were going to be able to save the ship. And at that point, I could turn damage control over to my XO, and now I could focus on the next phase, because we knew if we could contain it to just those 2 of the 4, we weren't going to sink. And now I could focus on the triage effort to try and save lives.
And now you're trying to save lives. And at this point, you don't know how many casualties. And this explosion was huge. I was just amazed that it blew what, like a 30 by 40 foot size hole?
If you were to take the hole in the side with the pictures. And so cracks went to within 18 inches of the keel under the ship. And if you were to measure that around to the top, and then from side to side, the hole was 40 by 40 feet. It was as if a giant had taken his fist, punched it in the ship, moved it around, and pulled it back out. Because when you were standing right at the epicenter near the galley area, and you could stand at this waist-high piece of metal and look down into what's left of main engine room number 1 and out the side of the ship. From the side of the ship into that point, it's over 20 feet deep. It's just a huge cavern at that point. You could smell the fuel. And at that point, we have not been able to mechanically or electrically isolate it. So as I'm standing there looking down at all that fuel, I'm seeing flashes of light. But now it's even worse, because down in all that fuel, I'm hearing it's live electrical wires. And I'm thinking we're about to have a major fire on our hands. Fortunately, that didn't happen, but it could have. And what I also didn't know is there is a pipe that runs around the ship that's called the fire main system. It had blown away about 60 feet of it. So we were in the process of trying to isolate the damaged section to get fire main pressure up to even be able to fight a fire had it occurred.
Yeah, it could have, if that had ignited, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously besides an explosion and attack, but a fire on a ship is one of the worst things.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, the one thing you have to remember is we train and practice for that. But when you're at sea with your crew, you are your 911 force. So you need to make sure that you are trained and ready for everything that may happen when you call 911. You're going to be doing that on the ship, whether it's damage control, whether it's triage for wounded, all that has got to be handled by you until you can figure out when, where, and if you're going to get outside help.
Something that hit me reading and doing research was it started taking on water again, and almost you had saved it once and then the crew had saved it again, essentially.
We did. We got hit on a Thursday. Friday, Saturday, we're pretty much in working very hard to restore systems around the ship, get fresh water back up, make sure the air conditioning units, because we had no power in the forward 2/3 of the ship. And we were trying to figure out how, using casualty power cables from the switchboard in number 3 generator room, we could try and restore some of the systems, but let's get them up back aft. Let's make sure we can get water so that the crew can at least take showers. Let's keep up lighting. Let's keep up air conditioning. But going into early Sunday morning, we had almost gotten all the water out of number 2 auxiliary machinery room when all of a sudden it started to reflood. I didn't like the situation. I told the XO, wake the crew up. I want them at general quarters. And that's when our only operating generator quit. We had 3 chances to restart it. We went through 1, 2, 3 shots of high pressure air. The generator wouldn't restart. And at that point in time, I'm in the worst circumstances possible. No Navy ship likes to be at sea when it's hot, dark, and quiet. And now we were sinking next to the pier because we can't control the floodwaters. And God loves sailor ingenuity, because one of my sailors came up to me and said, "Captain, we can't get number 3 generator started right away. We have no ability to do it. But what if we were to go down into number 2 engine room, cut a hole in the side of the ship, get the pumps down there and start running them to at least control the floodwaters?" And that's exactly what we did. Cut a hole in the side of the ship, started the pumps. That pump, the floodwaters at that point were not going up anymore, but they weren't going down either. So we were steady. And sailor ingenuity again kicks in, because one said, what if we were to take the power from a pump and get power to a high pressure air compressor and start running that in order to fill the generators again. And that's what we started to do. And so we jury-rigged fittings, filled the flask with enough high-pressure air for 2 shots, and 5 minutes after midnight on Monday morning, we would have on the first shot start number 3 generator. They got power back to the ship. That meant we restored systems. We were able to get the floodwaters down. And then pretty much we had power the majority of time that we were there in port.
But now that I've heard this piece of it, I think what's incredible is even as the leader of the person that's looked to for all the answers, that you were willing to accept information from other people to help you lead.
Absolutely. I mean, my sailors are the ones that truly know the systems. I may have that big overarching picture on how the ship should run and operate and what we need to do to be able to fight the ship should we need to. They're the ones that come up with those ideas. And I think the one thing that you have to remember as a leader in a moment like this, you have to have what I call focus and vision. So in other words, you have a very wide span of control and that big, broad picture. But as people bring you an issue, that might be this little sliver right here. What you have to develop the ability to do is take that sliver and make it your world. Gather the best information possible from that individual, listen to what their recommendations are, then you make a decision. And you make it based on the best information you have, hand that back to them, collapse that wedge down, get the big picture again, because as the senior leader or any leader in any position in the chain of command for what you're responsible for, you have to maintain that vision of where you are and what you need to do going into the future. And when you're making decisions, you have to remember what you're really doing is you're acting in the now while thinking ahead. And in doing that, you're really asking yourself what I call the what next question. What do I need to think about next? What do I need to plan for next? And what do I need to do next in order to help mitigate and control the crisis?
And that has to be an emotional situation that you were in. Did you allow yourself to feel those emotions?
Immediately, no. All that's going to be dealt with later. First thing I needed to do was I need to focus on the 2 things that mattered. What do I have to do to save my ship? And what do I have to do to save my crew? Nothing else mattered. And even in the days that followed, when the crew was getting a little antsy and wanted to communicate with their parents back home or their loved ones back home, husbands and wives, I had to kind of have a little bit of a harsher conversation with them and say, stop. Your families, when you talk to them, are going to get a good news call. 17 of these families got the worst news possible. So I know you want to talk to your families. I know you're anxious about making sure they can hear your voice, but our focus needs to be here and now because your family's going to get that good news call. I get to jump ahead a little bit now because I will tell a story of when we finally did get phones, and it was about a week after the attack. We set up 2 areas. We only had 2 phones. Everyone was limited to a 5-minute call. And I told the XO, I want that area draped off so they could talk in privacy. And it's amazing. Everyone that got through to family when they walked out of there, I had no idea how much dust was in the air because everyone is walking out, rubbing their eyes and, giving it this. And it's because you hear that voice after a moment like this. And I don't care who you are. You let your guard down. And that's exactly what I knew was going to happen. And the crew needed to do that.
When did you have an opportunity to do that?
I talked and called Mom. She started getting teared up. And I just said, Mom, we'll deal with that when I get home. Right now, I can't let my guard down because I need to focus. But that had an unfortunate flip side. Because I took those emotions and held them back, I was still demanding a lot of my crew, even though they were doing a lot. We had a lot of things to do to keep that ship afloat. And the crew came to view that as the captain is still driven, mission focused, doesn't understand what we've been through, and has no concept of what we're going through at our level. When in fact, I did. I had gone through the difficult emotion of being the only person that identified the 12 sailors trapped in the wreckage of the ship as they were brought out. I had to have that hard conversation where I realized that as a leader, appearing disconnected from my crew, I was failing as a leader. And then I had to have that hard conversation with my crew where I let my guard down and told them, I am suffering as much as you are, and here's how. And I think in that moment, the crew and I became bonded for the rest of our lives.
I think when you're leading, especially in a tense situation like that, a lot of times there's not time for niceties or to, like you said, the only two things mattered: save the ship, save the crew. How I'm feeling, I could process later, but also the crew seeing you as a human.
Yep.
I mean, you're the commander, you're the captain, but you're human too. And doing that balance, you had to talk with them. They got to see it. And since that, something that stuck out to me was you want to do something good for the crew. And I don't know if we'll get into how much I think the lack of support for you when you were in aiding going through this, but you asked for ice cream and somehow they got ice cream out there at some point. And just that little thing, like you said, the phone call, you being human, what did that do for morale of the crew, which is very important as they've suffered through this?
There were instances where support may have fallen short, and I tightened up the chain of command above me, that I knew what I needed to do to support my crew, and I didn't care how many stars you had. There was an expectation and a demand by me that they should provide that, and here's why. After we had recovered the 12th sailor, Admiral Moore wanted to come out to the ship and talk to the crew and just tell them what a phenomenal job they've done. And I was asked by the Destroyer Squadron 50 commander, is there anything you can do? Because it's been a few days. I mean, we get hit on October 12th. October 13th is the Navy birthday. We had kind of set that aside for a few days.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, we're going to get a cake that we're going to serve the crew for the Navy's birthday. I think it would be appropriate to have ice cream. Okay. So how do you take when we're in 105 degrees and get ice cream without having a melted puddle where all the chocolate chips have settled to the bottom of the 5-gallon tub and get it out there? And somehow Admiral Moore and Captain Hanna pulled that off, and we got, by that point, soft serve ice cream out to the ship. But we were serving the crew, and Admiral Moore and I cut it up and dished it to them to give them cake and ice cream for the Navy's birthday. Doing something little like that was an incredible boost, because now they realized there's a lot of people out there that we don't know who are bending over backwards and jumping through hoops to get what we need to help us survive this event. And I think that's where the crew really began to realize that this is bigger than any of us thought it was going to be. We have no idea what was going on stateside because we really weren't connected to the news. We had no idea that the president had already held a memorial ceremony in Norfolk with the families who had lost loved ones, plus many of the wounded showed up. So it was a pretty amazing event.
You didn't even know that. It's just so hard to comprehend, like today's digital age with everything. And like 25 years ago, you wouldn't have known.
For instance, the horrible atrocities that have just happened in the past few weeks, the moments that they happened, our phones were alerted and we were seeing it instantaneously.
Well, when the battle group deployed, the George Washington battle group deployed, and we were part of it, even though we were working separately, we were the first battle group to deploy where everyone had internet access. So, but you have to remember that 128K pipe is not real big. And that's with one person online. You get two, and you're half that. So it was, there's a lot to be said. We're not talking gigs of download capability.
Almost like dial-up.
Slower than dial-up. It made AOL seem high speed back then.
Wow.
And I mean, unfortunately, this, as you're still, there's still, and I don't know how else to say it, you recover the casualty, but there's still pieces in the wreckage, right? At this time of your crew that
we didn't know.
We didn't know.
At the time, I surmised from looking at the damage and from seeing the devastation, I think that the Navy leadership, not to their fault, they had no concept of what this explosion had done to the ship and done to the people. The recovery effort was extremely difficult. God love the FBI. because I had 3 of their special agents that stepped up, put on the Tyvek suits, the masks, the filters, the gloves. They went into the wreckage of the galley along with the Mobile Diving Salvage Unit 2 doing all the underwater recoveries. And they located my sailors and got them out. But an improvised explosive device with that kind of power, where the shockwave moved at 25,000 feet per second, all that damage on the ship was over in less than 3 milliseconds. IEDs do horrific things to a human body. And it was an unfortunate effect that afterwards, as they came home, just like with 9/11, just like on Cole, or what we experienced later on with IEDs in Afghanistan, in Iraq, they would have to go knock on the door and say, we have made further identification. What should we do? That's one of those horrific circumstances that we in the military don't really talk about, because when that happens, that's part of the burden that not only we bear, but our families do as well. And I think that we somewhat want to shield that from the American public. And I'm one of those that believe that we should. I don't want the American public to know what we have to necessarily deal with. That's part of the burden that when we choose to serve our nation, we assume that burden. We assume the responsibility that goes with it. It is going to become a part of the fabric of who we are, and we will live with it for the rest of our lives. Every single person that raises their right hand and chooses to serve had best be prepared to do that. And if not, don't serve.
Just to get inside your mind, you recover the crew, save the ship. They're going to get the ship basically put onto a salvage vessel. My non-Navy terms here. The Blue Marlin, I believe.
Yes.
And
the ship Blue Marlin.
They're going to get it floated back home. And you have what I could say is the impossible decision, maybe, of do you go home with your crew, or as a captain, do you stay with your ship?
During the course of our time in port, I talked with virtually everyone in our chain of command, up to and including the President of the United States. Had a phone call with President Clinton the day after the attack. 2 days before USS Cole was going to get towed out of Aden Harbor, 23 miles down the coast, to that heavy lift ship Blue Marlin that would be like a large floating dry dock and would lift us up and bring the ship home for repairs. I had a conversation with the Chief of Naval Operations at the time, Admiral Vern Clark, and he said, Kirk, the decision of whether you stay with the ship or come home is entirely yours. And at that point, I deferred it. And I just said, Admiral, you've got far more experience in the Navy than I do. You've had far more commands than I've had. If you were in my position, knowing what you know now, what would you do? One of the unique things about being the captain of a ship is you are the ship. That's best exemplified by when the commanding officer walks down the pier to come aboard a ship, they ring 4 bells. Ding, 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 ding. Cole arriving. Okay? It's not Lippold arriving. It's Cole arriving, because the captain is the ship and the ship is the captain. And you own that. And it is you the entire time you're in command. So when I asked the Admiral, what should I do? He said, Kirk, I would recommend you stay with the ship. Okay, decision made. If it's my decision is to stay with the ship. Once we got the ship up on Blue Marlin, the crew left. I shook the XO's hand and said, okay, when you get back to Norfolk, you're the captain until I'm back there. I'll see you in 6.5 weeks. And off they went. The next day, everything was fine. It was actually, I'd gotten a care package and it was Halloween, and I handed out little packets of candy that I'd gotten to the crew of Blue Marlin, which they thought was absolutely awesome. The next day, I get a phone call and I'm told, hey, we're going to send a helo over, or we're going to send a boat over, pick you up. You're going to go to USS Hawes, and they're going to put you on a helo and get you back with the crew. And I said, well, wait a minute. I had a conversation with the CNO, and he recommended that I stay with the ship, and it was my decision. I'm staying with the ship. And I went through the CO of Hawes to the Joint Task Force Commander, Rear Admiral Fitzgerald, who was Deputy Fifth Fleet Commander at the time, to Admiral Moore, who expressed his displeasure that I had spoken with the CNO and hadn't let him know about that conversation. I said, well, there's a lot going on, Admiral. He came back, and what he had done in the interim is he made a call to the CNO and said, what do you think? And he came back and said, the CNO's changed his mind and he thinks you should come home with the crew now. I said, well, in that case, I've changed my mind. And I came home with the crew. And what I didn't know at the time was there were also two things that were playing into the background. One was, if I stayed with the ship for the next 6.5 weeks, conveniently, I would be unavailable for anything going on with the investigation into the attack, which would be an awful awkward situation and would hold up the investigation. And two, there was some concern, believe it or not, about my mental stability. Could I handle what was going on? Would I be sitting there alone with my SOTs for 6.5 weeks looking over the wide South Atlantic and do something that, God forbid, they did not want to have happen? That never even crossed my mind. There was too much to do to help that crew of 30 half military and civilians get the ship kind of doing the assessment so that when it came back, it would be ready to go into the shipyard and start the repair process. But that played in the background. And ultimately, I was like, okay, that wasn't me. When I first got on board, the crew was very worried because they thought I'd been fired. And I was like, no, there's allowances within Navy regulations to temporary turnover command. That's what I did while the ship's on Blue Marlin. The afternoon she arrived back in Pascagoula on December 13th, I reassumed command of USS Cole. No big deal. The bureaucracy and the senior leadership of the Navy had no real concept of how bad the damage was and what we had been through. They were dealing with it for what they were reading on a message on a piece of paper. And while there were some pictures that had been taken that got back to them, they had no concept of the sheer devastation that had occurred.
Reminds me of living in North Carolina. We've seen our fair share of hurricanes, and a lot of our friends and family live, on the coastal side. And you see the photographs and they look, obviously like they've had a hurricane. But then when you see it in person, you realize photographs cannot capture the sheer magnitude of devastation. And I'm sure that was very similar for your case.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at, I've got some pictures of the interior of the ship and I do before and after shots, and standing in the same spot, because what the FBI tried to do was they went on to another destroyer that was supporting us, Donald Cook. Standing in the exact same spot, they would take a picture of what the ship should look like. Then they would go aboard Cole and find that exact same spot and stand there and take the same shot with the same aperture and lighting. And that is what really started to give people context for just how bad it was.
Wow. It's remarkable, the damage, but I get how people can't understand unless you've experienced or you've seen it in person. And something that sticks out to me after this, you're back home in the States, some of your wounded are getting out of the hospital, and you as the commander of the ship and a leader say, hey, if the families will have me, I want to go see and talk with the families. Not that anyone's going to be really happy to see you or may not be, but you say, hey, it's my duty, if you will, to go talk with these families because I was in command. Can you talk us through that kind of process?
Even though the investigation was going on, starting in December, right after the ship came back, I approached the Navy because I felt that I needed to go visit with the families of the 17 sailors that were killed. The Navy, being a good bureaucracy, the first answer was not only no, but hell no. I looked at it and said, okay, we have a starting point for negotiations. So then I reached out again post-Christmas and New Year's and said, I really think this is a good idea for me to go with my command master chief. The only other person I wanted there was what they call a CACO, the Casualty Assistance Calls Officer. They're the ones that have gotten out of the black sedan, knocked on the door, and delivered the worst news possible. But the families form a unique bond when that happens. And they trust that individual because they are the face of the Navy that is taking care of them. I was going to be the outsider. And I told the Navy when I go to do this, they're not coming here. I'm going to go to their home where they feel comfortable, where they're in familiar surroundings, and I am the outsider. To the Navy's credit, they finally relented and said, yes, once the investigation's released and the families have it, you can go. And I got on the road for 6 weeks and traveled around the country. And as you can imagine, 17 sailors doesn't mean 17 nice white houses or little houses with a white picket fence around it. 17 sailors turned out to be 29 different family groups that I would go visit with. And when I was met at the front door, whether it was with open arms or outright hostility, we spent the first hour and they grilled me. Why were you there? Why didn't you refuel at sea? Why didn't you get the intel that you needed? Why did that boat get along? How did that boat get alongside and why did you allow it? All those questions got asked and I answered them. And I also knew that I needed to be consistent from family 1 to family 29 because I knew the families talked. Great advantage is that when you tell the absolute truth, you can do it. There were some questions I wouldn't answer, like where was my sailor found and what condition were they were in? Families didn't need to know that. And as I would tell a mother years later, why couldn't I see my baby? I said, I'll tell you exactly why, because I want you to remember your son for 2 times in your life. One was the first time you held him after he'd been born. And next time is when you gave him a hug when he had just graduated from boot camp. I don't want you to ever remember seeing your sailor for what I saw. And I would go out and I just felt that was important to do because those families needed to do it. But then the hard part came in the second hour. Because that's when I was handed wedding albums, funeral programs, the memorials, mother taking a picture off the mantle and handing it to me and saying, did you really know my daughter? And as captain, I had unfortunately been in command for 15 months, and I was able to share an individual story with each of those families about where I had interacted with their sailor. And they knew that I knew them. And that to me was helpful, not only for the families, but me as well. And there was no media involved. I refused. You wanted media there? We'll reschedule it. So it was just me with the Command Master Chief, the Keiko, and the families.
I think it's powerful that you talk about how meaningful it was for you, having led them through this experience. There's some therapeutic value in that for you, meeting the families. When I think of the Navy, I think of honor and integrity and character, and that's where when I think of you, that's what I think of.
Well,
and that's
thank you. That's very kind. But I just looked at it as the captain that's part of my responsibility. When you're the one accountable officer, you're going to bear the burden of what happened for the rest of your life. And fortunately, I didn't put it in that box and walk away. And I chose to continue to talk about it because I look at it as an honor and a privilege to be able to continue to share the story of the heroism, not only of my crew, but I want us to also remember as Americans, those 17 sailors that died for our freedom.
Heroes. All right. Heroes. And to me, you being the leader through that situation, looking at the investigation reports, there was, I hate saying it, but there was nothing you could have done differently to change that. Under the rules of engagement in the world, we knew it in 25 years ago that would have changed that incident. But to me, the Navy politics got into play, and not that it's about your career, because we're not comparing a career to the life of 17 sailors, but your career was kind of put on hold at that point from this.
Look, we who choose to serve have a chain of command, and sitting atop that chain of command is our service secretary and the Secretary of Defense. And who are those people? They're political appointees. So whether we like it or not, sometimes as professional military personnel, the decisions that get made are going to be political in nature. What a lot of people don't realize is that for officers and promotions, every officer has to receive, just like a Supreme Court justice, the advice and consent of the Senate to promote. So when I was selected for promotion to captain and my name went over, Senate balked. Senator John Warner from Virginia held it up and threatened the Navy with reopening the Cole investigation, and the Navy didn't want to deal with the politics of it. 4.5 years later, I was pulled off the list. Guess what? That's what goes with it. And as professionals, you get two choices when that happens and the decision is political. Put up and shut up or get out. And I chose to continue to serve because I believed in my Navy and my nation. And regardless of how it turned out, more importantly, I believe in the Constitution.
I think that's powerful. You're continuing to serve. And I mean, only 11 months after the attack on the Cole, 9/11 happens, 2001. Where were you on the morning of 9/11, 2001?
By that point, I had come off of Cole, visited with the families, had my change of command, attended the Joint Forces Staff College in Norfolk, and had reported to the Joint Staff at the end of July. So I'm working in the Pentagon. I got a call from a former commanding officer who said, hey, since you're just new in town, he had retired. He was now working up at the agency for a guy that's a legend at the CIA, Charlie Allen. Very modest title, the Director of Collections. Okay, when you think about what the CIA collects around the world, that's a pretty big job. He said, my boss would like to have you come up so that from an agency perspective, we can explain to you what we knew before, during, and after the attack when it comes to bin Laden and al-Qaeda. So I got the morning off, hopped in my car, beautiful fall morning, drove up, talked to the nice camera, went to the front gate. The nice armed guard gives me a VIP pass. I'm in front of the old headquarters building. I walked in, and it's just like a movie. I mean, there's the giant seal for the CIA on the floor in the lobby in the old headquarters building. To my left is the one gold star for the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor organization. On the left-hand wall, the right-hand wall is the Wall of Honor with all the other gold stars for those that have served with the book, some named, some not named. And we go up and I sit down around 7:30 and around 7 o'clock, and the briefing goes for an hour and a half. And at the end, Mr. Allen looks at me and says, what do you think? And I said, well, sir, I'll be honest. America doesn't understand. I believe it is going to take a seminal event probably in this country before Americans realize we're at war with this guy. We left his office to go look at some overhead imagery of al-Qaeda training camps at Tarnak Farms and some other areas.
In Afghanistan?
After that, about 20 minutes after I said that, the first plane hit the North Tower. It was the morning of 9/11. And we're kind of looking at it, and I'm thinking to myself, what idiot sightseeing plane on a beautiful, crystal clear day in the fall could have possibly slammed into the Twin Towers? And as I'm standing outside the counterterrorism center about to walk in and meet the guy undercover at the time, Cofer Black, the second plane hit. And that's when everybody knew we were under attack. And we went back up, and I will never forget, Mr. Allen shooed everyone out of his office, comes up, puts his arm around me and says, I can't believe what you said this morning. And I said, well, sir, I guess it's something that I've known about for about a year. The nation's going to find out about today, and we're going to have a busy day. I better get down. And I drove down to the Pentagon. And for those of you that are kind of maybe familiar with that area, you come up on the split, and you can either go south on the George Washington Parkway and get on 395 South, the main artery coming out of Washington, or you can head off toward South Parking at the Pentagon. And I went south and parked up right on the highway in an area called Boundary Channel Drive. And I had Arlington police come up and say, you got to move? And I said, no, I'll stay where I am. Then I'd have the highway patrol come up, said, you got to move. Told them who I was. Okay, you can stay. And I ended up being there all day long. And so when I heard that the Twin Towers had collapsed, I thought they had just kind of gone ka-chunk, and had no idea till I got home that night that not only had the Twin Towers collapsed, but at that point, we were now a nation at war.
And there had been other attacks by bin Laden al-Qaeda before that, but
terrorism has been with us a long time. My first ship was a tank landing ship supporting the Marine Artillery Battery ashore in Beirut, Lebanon. I went ashore as part of seeing the Marines and getting a tour in April. I was in the embassy in Beirut only a few days before they blew the face off, killing 17 Americans. So unfortunately, that number rings with me to a very close and personal degree. But that was 1983. Khobar Towers in 96. Embassy bombings in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. We had been watching it for decades as terrorism metastasized into what happened to us on 9/11. And we had failed to recognize the threat. And we can't afford that anymore. And I'm a firm believer that if you want to stop terrorism around the world, what you need to make these groups understand, and those who give them the financial support that allow them to go out there, follow the money. You harm, you kill an American, we're going to track you down no matter where you are in the world, and we're going to kill you. Period. Dead martyrs kill no one.
Exactly. Amen. I'm ready to go.
Before you move on, as you were there, were you able to see the side of the Pentagon that was then hit? Were you aware?
On the parking?
Right.
Yeah, from where I was, that particular area on 395 and Boundary Channel Drive is almost exactly 180 degrees out. That said, you could see the flames from all the jet fuel burning. You could see the roof was on fire. Thousands of employees and military personnel were streaming out. At the same time, everyone was streaming out of Washington, D.C. And literally, we were walking out into the middle of the highway, stopping metro buses, loading them up with people that were headed out of the city, and just telling the buses, drive south, and if someone dings, let them off, and they'll walk back into their neighborhoods or figure out how to get a ride home, because cell service was kind of down because everyone was calling, so the system was overloaded. And we just said, we just need to get people out of the city and away from potential targets in danger, because we didn't know about Flight 93. We had heard rumors. By that point, the F-16s had launched out of Andrews Air Force Base and were flying over the city.
And you can hear that for those that don't know from the Pentagon. It's a impressive sound that will get your attention.
It's a sound of freedom.
Yes, sir.
It is. And to think now 25 years removed, 24 years from 9/11, 25 years from October 12th, the attack on the USS Cole. Do you have any reflections on, I guess, what it's meant to you, a defining moment of your life, at least in my mind? What are your thoughts 25 years later?
The one thing that I think our nation needs now, more than anything, is that we make decisions for our national security through a crystal clear moral and ethical lens, because that will define not only the current situation, but it lays the groundwork for our survival into the future. Because when you start making political compromises in order to satisfy constituencies, rather than taking the American people and what we stand for and the Constitution itself, that begins to degrade at the edges, which eventually leads to that decay that we cannot afford.
How will you spend October 12th, 2025?
This October 12th, I will be in Norfolk, Virginia for a ceremony at the memorial that was created after the attack and dedicated 1 year after the attack. We'll also see the ship, which is in port. Very proud of USS Cole. For those that don't know, USS Cole was repaired. She's back in service today. And last Christmas Eve, she returned from deployment after shooting down Houthi missiles in the Red Sea and Iranian ballistic missiles off the coast of Israel. So she is still out there defending our freedom, and I couldn't be more proud to be part of the legacy for the crew that serves aboard her today, where, small story that I'd like to tell, is that when we came up on the first sunset on the first day, the XO and I are standing at the back end of the ship. Navy ships always hold a ceremony called colors. Every morning at 8 o'clock, just like bases around the world, we raise the flag. In our case, it was flying on the ship that day at a flagstaff at the back end. But then every evening at sunset, calculated no matter where we are in the world, we lower the flag, fold it, and wait till the next day to raise it. So as the XO and I are standing at the back end near the fantail. He looks at me and says, "What do you want to do about colors, Captain? Do you want to hold it like we normally do to show they haven't disrupted our routine? Do you want to lower it to half mast to honor the 17 sailors killed, 37 wounded? How do you want to deal with colors?" And I remember looking at my XO. I looked up at that flag all stained with the dirty black residue of the explosion. I looked over at Aiden where the lights were coming on in the twilight, and then I said, "XO, we're not going to hold colors. That flag is going to fly at full mast. I want lights rigged to shine up on it as a symbol of our resolve that we're not going to let this terrorist attack deter us from our mission of defending freedom." That flag would fly for the next 8 days until all the sailors had been recovered. And on the 9th day, we held a memorial ceremony where chaplain spoke, I spoke, a crew member from every rank that we'd lost spoke, officer, chief, petty officer, enlisted. Then we sang Amazing Grace. Chaplain gave the benediction. We lowered the flag. We passed it down a line of 17 sailors. We announced every one of our shipmates that we'd lost and rendered that last final salute. That flag was given to me, that I turned over to my relief, and it's mounted on the mess decks of USS Cole today.
Wow.
It was our source of inspiration then and serves as a source of inspiration today for those sailors serving on that ship defending freedom.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I was going to ask you where's the flag, but wow. Like, talk about inspiration sitting there. Like,
And have you seen the ship since you left?
Oh, I've been aboard a number of times.
Okay.
Let me tell you, every single sailor that serves aboard USS Cole today know that they're continuing to uphold a legacy. They're very proud of their ship and everything they do, and I could not be more proud of every single one of them, past, present, and in future, that will serve aboard that ship.
last question. We ask all our guests this. What do you value most in life?
I value the responsibility of the freedom we enjoy in our country, given to us by a Constitution, and the American people who entrust those like you, me, and others to go forward and keep our country safe.
Kirk, we're just so grateful. I mean, truly an honor to have you here in the studio, to trust us to sit down with us. And I know it's a busy time of the 25th anniversary, but this truly was, I got goosebumps.
And not only a busy time, but I have to recognize, from an empathetic perspective, this is an emotional time. So to be willing to take the time to sit down and open that up, it means the world to us.
I do it because it keeps the memory of my sailors alive, and it honors the sacrifice that they made. As a quick aside, I'll share this with you. Right here, I still wear the dog tags that were issued to me as a midshipman, but I also have a third tag. On one side, it's an engraved picture of the ship, and on the other side are the names of my 17 sailors. So every morning when I get up, I remember them.
Thank you for sharing. Just incredible honor, and this was special. So, thank you, buddy.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Subscribe, like, and comment, and don't forget to set those notifications. We'll see you next week with another special guest.
Until then, own your journey.